Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty fascinating. It sits right where neuroscience, psychology, and, well, cutting-edge therapy all seem to converge. Imagine if the very way we feel our internal burns, could actually be physically uh, shifted, remapped for real, lasting relief.
Yeah, absolutely. We've pulled together some really interesting research for this,
Hmm.
and there's this brand new theoretical framework we really want to unpack today. It explores how psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy might trigger these rapid, enduring antidepressant effects, especially for people dealing with what's called treatment-resistant depression, or TRD.
Right, TRDs. So our mission today isn't just to look at if it works, but really how it might be working, and specifically focusing on this idea you mentioned, embodied metaphor remapping.
Uh-huh.
So what sources are guiding us here? What are we drawing on?
Okay, so our main guide is a detailed article by Nikolaos Fageas. It actually introduces this embodied metaphor remapping framework, EMR for short. And what it does is it synthesizes concepts from a few different fields. You've got embodied cognition, the idea our thinking is tied to physical experience. Then narrative psychology, how we understand our lives through stories. And also mental space psychology, which looks at how we sort of mentally map out our thoughts using metaphors. So it's this really interdisciplinary lens for looking at, well, potentially profound therapeutic change.
Okay, let's start with the core problem then, the reason this is needed. What exactly is treatment-resistant depression, and why is it such a tough nut to crack clinically?
Well, major depressive disorder, MDD, it affects a huge number of people worldwide, over 280 million. And while first-line treatments, things like SSRIs or CBT, they help many, around a third of patients approximately meet the criteria for TRD.
A third. That's significant.
It really is. And TRD means they haven't responded adequately to at least two different standard antidepressant therapies. For these folks, there's often, unfortunately, a much higher likelihood of difficulty functioning day to day. Relapse is common, and suicidality rates are higher too. And often you find standard treatments might ease symptoms a bit, but they don't always get to the underlying mental and emotional roots of the problem.
Which brings us to where things get really interesting lately. There's been this surge, hasn't there, in scientific focus on psychedelics, like psilocybin for TRD. What's the research showing us?
It's definitely a hot area.
Yeah.
Phase 2 clinical trials have shown quite remarkable results. They've demonstrated that just a single high-dose psilocybin session, when it's properly supported with psychotherapy, can bring about rapid and, importantly, durable antidepressant effects, even in people who've had TRD for a long time.
Rapid and durable. That's kind of the holy grail, isn't it?
It is. And the effects are often linked to things like acute neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself quickly. Also, this uniquely altered state of consciousness people experience, and maybe a short-term shift in their thinking patterns.
Yeah.
But before this EMR idea came along, there wasn't really a strong explanation for how these deep, permanent-seeming changes could happen at the level of meaning, the metaphors we live by.
Right. How does a chemical change translate into a change in life's meaning?
Exactly. EMR tries to bridge that very gap.
Okay, so let's unpack the EMR model itself. It suggests psilocybin helps through the spatial and somatic transformation of depressive metaphors. That sounds complex. What does that actually mean for someone?
Okay, let's break it down. EMR theory suggests psilocybin temporarily gives you broader access to your metaphoric addressable space. Think of it like unlocking doors in your own mind to rooms you couldn't get into before. So these emotional symbolic things that felt completely stuck, totally unmovable, like the classic feeling of a black hole inside or a heavy stone on the chest, suddenly under psilocybin, these can be visualized differently, maybe moved around internally. Their emotional meaning can be decoded in a new way.
Wow.
So EMR is proposing that the therapy works not just because of brain chemistry changes, the neuroplasticity, but also because it helps reorganize these really fundamental inner metaphors that shape our emotions and our whole sense of self.
So it's not just about talking about feeling a weight. It's about actually potentially shifting that felt weight experientially.
Precisely. It's deeply embodied. It connects narrative psychology, embodied cognition, and this mental space idea to suggest our thoughts, our feelings, they aren't just abstract. They're rooted in our senses, our body's experience. And they occupy these meaningful positions in our internal, subjective kind of 3D space.
Like a mental map.
Kind of, yeah. And depressive stories or narratives, they're often structured through specific language, yes, but also powerful imagery, metaphor, and crucially, this bodily felt sense. It's visceral.
That feels incredibly intuitive, actually. But how does the psilocybin physically make this remapping possible? What's happening in the brain?
Right, the biology. So when you ingest psilocybin, your body quickly converts it to psilocin. And psilocin primarily acts as what's called a partial agonist at certain serotonin receptors, specifically the 5-HT-A type.
Okay, 5-HTRO.
Yeah. Think of these receptors like docking stations on nerve cells. Psilocin fits into them. And these particular docking stations are really dense in key brain areas. The neocortex, like regions like the prefrontal cortex vital for decision-making, planning. The anterior and posterior cingulate cortex areas involved in self-awareness, emotional regulation, spotting errors.
Really core areas for how we experience ourselves.
Absolutely. And activating these 5-HT receptors seems to increase neuronal firing. It kind of boosts the signal-to-noise ratio, which might explain why things that were maybe subconscious or just below the surface suddenly become much more vivid and accessible.
And I've heard a lot about its effect on the default mode network, the DMN. That seems important here, too.
Oh, definitely. That's a really defining feature of the psilocybin state, the acute disruption of the DMN.
Can you remind us what the DMN does again?
Sure. The DMN is it's a network of brain regions that's most active when we're kind of mind-wandering, thinking about ourselves, the past, the future, self-referential thought.
The inner monologue stuff?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's often hyperactive in depression linked to that rumination, getting stuck in negative thoughts about oneself. So studies show psilocybin reduces the integrity of the DMN, kind of loosens its grip, and at the same time, increases global connectivity across the brain. More communication between areas that don't usually talk much.
So less fixation on the self, more widespread connection.
That's the idea. It lines up really well with this model called rebus relaxed beliefs under psychedelics, which basically suggests psilocybin temporarily lowers the brain's confidence in its usual high-level assumptions or beliefs, the priors that normally filter our experience.
Making the brain more open, less rigid.
Exactly. It's like taking the usual filters off for a while, making the system more receptive to new associations, new ways of seeing things, new interpretations.
So it's not just the DMN, then?
No, it's broader. Psilocybin also seems to change signaling through the thalamus, a major relay station for sensory info. It reduces the usual gating or filtering of sensory input.
Which might explain the heightened senses people report.
Could be part of it, yeah. More raw data gets through to conscious awareness. This contributes to those intense sensory and emotional experiences. And crucially, these effects aren't just temporary. Psilocybin also seems to promote neuroplasticity longer term. It supports the growth of dendritic spires, connections between neurons, and enhances connectivity, particularly in areas like the hippocampus, which is vital for memory and learning.
Wow. So it's like it creates the conditions for change, both acutely and structurally.
Yes. An EMR framework conceptualizes this unique state as a moment of metaphor pluripotency. Meaning those deeply entrenched depressive symbols, the stone, the hole, whatever it is, for that person suddenly become like potential filled clay. They can acquire new meanings, be moved, reshaped, and this really bridges the gap to understanding things like those narrative breakthroughs or even mystical type experiences.
Right, people report those quite often.
They do. Experiences like ego dissolution, feeling interconnected, profound emotional insights. These seem to correlate with that DMN breakdown and the increased brain synchrony. It allows people to kind of step outside their usual rigid categories of self and world.
To see things fresh.
Exactly. Psilocybin acts like the paper called it a story breaker, a space rearranger, and chemical change agent, which makes it seem particularly suited for tackling the kind of stuckness you see in TRD.
Okay, so the brain is primed, it's flexible, the old stories are disrupted. How does the EMR framework actually guide someone through using that window therapeutically? You mentioned a 5-step cycle.
Yes, it outlines a clear therapeutic process that builds on that neurobiology. It integrates mental space, psychology, embodied cognition, and narrative therapy techniques. Step 1 is metaphoric activation.
Okay. Finding the metaphor.
Essentially, yes. Helping the client identify and then externalize their key depressive metaphors.
Yeah.
The therapist might ask things like, if your depression had a shape, what would it be? Or where do you feel that in your body? Or even if that feeling was here in the room, where would it be?
Making it tangible.
Exactly. Using floor markers, drawing, maybe even VR someday to give that inner experience a concrete form and location in space.
Okay, step 1, activate. What's next?
Step 2, somatic decoding. Once the metaphor is identified and maybe even placed somewhere physically or imaginarily, the client is guided to really connect with it in their body. What sensations come up?
Like the tight chest with the heavy load.
Precisely. Noticing the breathing, the posture, the tension associated with that metaphor. It's about learning to perceive the metaphor's information through the body and understanding the body as part of the metaphor. using breath work, maybe tiny movements to explore it.
So feeling it fully, then what?
Step 3, narrative disruption. This is where the acute psilocybin effects really come into play. The drug is doing its work disrupting the DMN, increasing that flexibility we talked about, and those metaphors that felt so solid and fixed, they start to become fluid.
Like the stone starts moving.
Exactly. The black hole might shrink or change color. The stone might feel lighter or shift position on its own. Things become malleable.
Okay, things are loosened up. What's step 4?
Step 4 is remapping. This is the active part. As the metaphors become flexible, the client, with gentle guidance, can consciously try repositioning them, moving that feeling of the stone from on the chest to maybe beside them or behind them.
Changing its location in their internal space.
Yes. And the goal here is finding what they call somatic congruence. Does the new position feel right? Does it feel better, more comfortable, soothing? They talk about somatic snap-in, that moment where it just clicks mentally and physically. The body signals less distress.
Like finding the right place for it.
Exactly. The therapist supports this with spatial prompts, maintaining a calm presence.
And the final step, making it last.
Right. Step 5, anchoring,
Mm.
integration. In the days and weeks after the session, the brain is still in that heightened state of plasticity.
The window's still open a crack.
Yeah, exactly. So anchoring is about reinforcing these new metaphor location feeling combinations. Through things like journaling about the new metaphor, specific relaxation practices, maybe physical movements that embody the new feeling, clients link the remapped metaphor to their own life story, their values, their hopes for the future. They might even create little if-then plans, like if I start to feel that old overwhelm, I'll imagine the stone resting beside me, and then I'll take 3 slow breaths.
So it becomes a tool they can consciously use going forward.
That's the aim, making the shift permanent and practical.
That 5-step process makes a lot of sense. To really see it in action, the source you mentioned includes a case study, right? About someone named James.
Yes, a brief vignette, but it illustrates the process well. James had been dealing with TRD for over 12 years, a long time. In his first EMR session before the psilocybin, he described his depression as this cold black stone on his chest. Very specific.
And he located it.
Yes, physically.
Yeah.
About 2 inches below his collarbone. They even marked that spot on the floor in the therapy room. Then, during his psilocybin session, he had this spontaneous memory surface. Something about shame from his childhood, deeply emotional.
Okay. And then came the disruption and remapping part.
Exactly. At one point, the therapist gently asked him something like, "Can you see where the stone wants to go now?"
Mm-hmm.
And James described vividly seeing it, visualizing it, pulling off his chest and moving to an empty spot nearby in his internal space.
He moved it.
He experienced it moving. And right as that happened, he took this huge, deep breath, apparently the first proper breath he'd taken in minutes. A clear physical release.
Wow. A somatic sign.
Definitely. And interestingly, in later sessions, that cold black stone didn't just stay moved. It actually transformed. It became, in his words, a seed, heavy yet full of possibilities.
From a dead weight to potential, that's quite a shift.
A huge metaphorical shift. And this wasn't just a fleeting insight during the session.
How did it stick for him, the anchoring part?
He worked on it. Daily journaling, using body-based grounding exercises related to the seed feeling, even drawing the new metaphor. 4 weeks later, he reported his relationship with his depression felt more spacious.
Spacious. That's an interesting word.
Isn't it? He said he no longer felt completely merged with it, like the stone was him. Instead, he felt he had a kind of dialogic relationship with this seed metaphor. It was something next to him, not inside him, crushing him.
So a change in relationship facilitated by moving the metaphor.
That's what the case suggests, yeah. It really highlights how EMR aims to revise these deep metaphors through spatial shifts and bodily engagement.
It certainly sounds like a deeply personal journey, which brings up the role of the therapist and the ethics involved. What's needed from the therapist in this EMR model?
It requires a real blend of skills. Therapists need strong somatic awareness, being able to track subtle shifts in the client's body language and guide somatic exploration. They also need good narrative therapy skills, understanding how to work with stories, metaphors, language, and of course, specialized training in psychedelic assisted therapy, navigating those altered states safely, managing potential difficulties.
And cultural awareness must be key too, right? Metaphors aren't universal.
Absolutely crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Cultural humility is vital. A weight on the chest might be the common metaphor in one culture, but maybe it's heat in the stomach or something else entirely in another. Therapists have to be really careful not to impose their own metaphorical framework. The process needs to be client-led. avoiding leading questions, really fostering the client's own internal discovery.
And for the client, what are the ethical considerations there?
Full informed consent is paramount. Clients need to understand the process clearly, including the fact that these metaphor exercises can bring up intense emotions or difficult memories. And they need to know their participation is always voluntary. They can pause or stop. It's flexible. Safety and autonomy are key.
So, thinking about the bigger picture, is EMR intended to, replace CBT or other therapies, or how does it fit in?
No, definitely not presented as a replacement. It's not seen as a standalone cure-all.
Hmm.
It's framed more as a broad approach that could potentially integrate really well with other existing therapies.
Like which ones?
Well, think about acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. EMR could potentially enhance the diffusion part, getting distance from difficult thoughts and feelings, seeing them as metaphors you can relate to differently. Or internal family systems, IFS, which talks about different parts of the self. EMR might offer a way to spatially work with and reframe those parts.
So, it enhances other experiential approaches.
That seems to be the idea. It helps bridge that gap between the insights gained during the psilocybin experience and making them concrete and usable in everyday life, making the change stick.
It's a really compelling model, but you mentioned it's theoretical for now. What's needed next for EMR?
Right, that's important context. While it's really promising and intuitively makes sense in many ways, EMR is, at this stage, speculative. The framework itself, as presented in this paper, hasn't been validated with specific empirical data yet.
So, research is needed.
Definitely. Key hypotheses need to be formally tested. Like, can we actually measure neurophysiological changes related to how depressive metaphors are represented spatially in the brain after psilocybin EMR? Can we quantify improvements in somatic regulation? Do changes in metaphors reliably predict improvements in depression scores?
Lots of questions to answer.
Many. And that cross-cultural validation we mentioned is critical. We need to avoid just applying Western ideas about metaphors everywhere. Research needs to figure out, who does this work best for? Under what specific conditions? And how does it translate across different cultural backgrounds?
A huge amount to explore still, but definitely a fascinating direction. What a deep dive this has been. The EMR framework offers this really fresh lens, doesn't it? It helps us see how psilocybin's effects might go way beyond just brain chemistry. It's about unlocking these rigid thinking patterns and reconnecting our emotions with our bodies, our personal stories, and even our sense of space.
It really does. It pushes us beyond just talking about feelings. It highlights how these metaphors we live, by which we genuinely feel in our bodies in specific locations, can become fluid, workable, and how shifting them might lead to really profound and potentially lasting change.
Which leads us perfectly into a final thought for you, our listeners, to consider. If our emotional burdens, our depression, our anxiety, our grief, are so often felt as tangible, physical, spatial experiences, like the weight on the chest or feeling trapped in a dark hole, what if the key to finding relief isn't only about thinking differently? What if it's also, perhaps crucially, about experiencing and maybe even consciously moving those internal symbols in a new way? What personal heavy loads might you be carrying right now? And could they perhaps benefit from being seen from a different perspective, or maybe even given a different location within your own inner landscape? Something to think about.